The Palestinian opposition, of course, are branded as terrorists. While Israel can depend on their sponsors' uncritical support, the Palestinian leaders have always been branded as such. Fatah and the PLO, led by Yasser Arafat, Fatah, that we're sort of told now with a respectable face that if only the Palestinians would listen to Fatah, then of course everything would be okay. No, not at all. When the Fatah led the Palestinian struggle, they were absolutely branded terrorists and had to go from country to country, as we all remember, in exile at the time, leading the Intifada and the resistance. The PFLP, led by Dr. George Habash. And now Hamas, ironically encouraged as an antidote to PFLP and Fatah in their time, having actually become the spokesman, real militant spokesman of struggle, the uncompromising representative of the Palestinian, are the new untouchables, the new terrorists. We all know, of course, that Israel is a terrorist. We know that this is an absolute farce. Who is guilty of imposing mass sanctions, blockade, and collective punishment? Israel, obviously. Who is guilty of ethnic cleansing? Israel. Who employs the latest high-tech weaponry against the defenseless civilian population? Israel. Which side is the terrorist? Quite clearly Israel. The US, as I said, has no use for a peaceful Israel. It needs a warlike Israel, and that's precisely what it maintains. Coming to the siege of Gaza. The siege of Gaza has now been going on, well, for well over a year. On 19th of September 2007, Gaza was officially dubbed enemy territory, and the 1.5 million inhabitants have been under siege, with a 6 months break that really continued the siege, but it was officially a ceasefire agreement ever since. So during 2008, prior to the most recent incursion, 389 Palestinians were killed in Gaza by the Israeli occupation forces, including 9 over 60, many women, large numbers of children, 103 teenagers, and 18 very young children, including several babies and toddlers. One young family, consisting of a mother and 3 children under 5, were wiped out by gunfire whilst eating dinner in their courtyard at home. And this is all prior to the current atrocity. A further 200 on top of that died as a result of Israel's blockade on medical supplies and its refusal to allow Palestinian patients to leave the Strip for essential hospital care. 80% of Gazans are reliant on food aid, receiving just 2/3 of the recommended daily calorific intake. 90% live now below the poverty line according to UN statistics. Electricity is often cut off. Diesel supplies are intermittently stopped and is in scarce supply. Water is often cut off. 210,000 people have access to water only for 2 hours a day. 900 supply trucks that normally would be enough to supply Gaza, well, they have a luxurious style of life under normal circumstances, have been reduced to just 15 per day. So 1.5% of it. And why? Essentially the people of Gaza, as I said, are being punished for supporting Hamas. They're having the wrong opposition. Doesn't matter that they were democratically elected, there's democracy in democracy, as we know. And ultimately the final sanction of democracy has to be the stamp of approval from good old Uncle Sam and UK and the EU imperialists. And without it, a regime is illegitimate, regardless of the will of the local people. We know that there have been significant lapses in that, and famously on the 23rd of January, when the border to Egypt was opened against the will of the Egyptian government, but by the forces on the ground, and hundreds of thousands were able to cross. And I think that gives a good pointer about one of the ways in which that this crisis can be rapidly brought to a conclusion. Almost a year into the siege, a 6-month ceasefire was finally agreed through mediated talks in Cairo in June this year. But that was dependent, the Israeli part of that ceasefire agreement was that they would loosen the grip of the siege on Gaza, that they would increase the number of crossings, and they would allow supplies in, and they'd simply have refused to do so. I could mention also in passing that the Free Gaza movement significantly has broken the international siege, and they've been sending boats to support Gaza. But obviously that's not ever going to be enough in volume to start supplying the real needs of the Gazan people, but it's significant symbolically, at least, to try to show that absolutely if there's a will, that there's perfectly good means to come to the rescue, to the aid of the people in Gaza. Unity, so prepared to take part in the peace process for Palestine, has been deafening. The peace process, with the rather farcical negotiations that took place in Annapolis, when everyone was invited apart from the democratically elected government of the Palestinians and of course the Iranians. So whilst claiming to be unable to sit and talk with Hamas, which is apparently too violent, they appear to have no such qualms about having Israel at the conference while it continues to violently oppress the Palestinian people in this way. For any negotiations on the future of Israel and Palestine to succeed, they must be on the basis of the minimum program of the Palestinian people, which are essentially full Israeli withdrawal to the pre-1967 borders and the right of return for Palestinian refugees as an absolute minimum. This program, set in motion in Oslo and stopped in its tracks at Camp David by the total intransigence of the US and Israeli negotiators, is the only basis on which negotiations could ever be successful. Israel has shown it's unwilling or unable to take that route. Therefore, the Palestinians have no choice but to resist in whatever means and whatever way is available to them. There was an interesting article published in Gush Shalom called "Help a Ceasefire," in which the journalist said, long last there exists in the world a consensus that peace in our region must be based upon coexistence of the State of Israel and the State of Palestine. Our government has slipped into this agreement and is exploiting it with another aim altogether: the rule of Israel in the whole country and the turning of the Palestinian population centres into a series of Bantustans. This is in fact a one-state solution, Greater Israel, in the guise of a two-state solution. And Olmert, the outgoing Prime Minister, recently himself stated, "If the day comes when the two-state solution collapses and we face a South African-style freedom struggle for equal voting rights, then as soon as this happens," says, "the State of Israel is finished. Israel as it is simply cannot continue to exist. Either it must grant the minimum demands of a Palestinian state, or by its continued intransigence it will indeed get a one-state solution, but not the one-state solution it envisages. Historical Palestine will be reborn." There was an interesting article published in Gush Shalom called "Help a Ceasefire," in which the journalist said, long last there exists in the world a consensus that peace in our region must be based upon coexistence of the State of Israel and the State of Palestine. Our government has slipped into this agreement and is exploiting it with another aim altogether: the rule of Israel in the whole country and the turning of the Palestinian population centres into a series of Bantustans. This is in fact a one-state solution, Greater Israel, in the guise of a two-state solution. And Olmert, the outgoing Prime Minister, recently himself stated, "If the day comes when the two-state solution collapses and we face a South African-style freedom struggle for equal voting rights, then as soon as this happens," says, "the State of Israel is finished. Israel as it is simply cannot continue to exist. Either it must grant the minimum demands of a Palestinian state, or by its continued intransigence it will indeed get a one-state solution, but not the one-state solution it envisages. Historical Palestine will be reborn."